Hey friends, over here at Disney Coffee and Book Talk, we are back another Sunday, woo woo, for Annotation Sundays, or Annotation, whatever I call it. I don't even remember. My mind's lost. Okay, I had like this much coffee today. Anywho, so we are going to dive into the third Harry Potter book. Again, continuing that the premise is that when we talk about problematic authors, their bigotry bleeds into the books. Now, of course, we're going to give props where props are due, being authors. That doesn't mean that there aren't like things like anagrams and soliloquies and good plotting, good character descriptions, moving things right along. Hi, sorry. My animals are saying hi. That was my Coco. So chapter 1 of The Prisoner of Azkaban. Now, I was just reading it in the car, technically listening to it. And there is a few things that will be foreshadowed or kind of like a recap summary from the first two books, but also foreshadowing for the future of the series in this chapter. First of all, we are back at the Dursleys with Harry. He does have his own room at this point. As we remember, it was Dudley's second room. He has his owl, Hedwig. His birthday is July 31st, if you guys don't remember. So he is turning 13 in this book. He had defeated Voldemort twice, or aka Tom Riddle. Tom Riddle was in the Chamber of Secrets. There is a mention that Hagrid, so in this chapter, he's turning 13, and he gets some presents from Ron, Hermione, and Hagrid. And Harry's thinking like, oh, Hagrid's not going to bring me anything dangerous. And then he's like, well, it's Hagrid. He may not intentionally give me anything dangerous, but it's Hagrid. He's had, at this point, a pet dragon, right? He's had a 3-headed dog named, that's not Fang. I forgot what the 3-headed dog's name is. And then he's had, we meet Aragog, his giant spider, right, in the last book. So maybe Hagrid isn't the best of characters when it comes to dangerous things, that's what Harry's thinking, because now he has this monster of monster books, right? The book of monsters of whatever, the book that tries to bite him. Anyway, so he has that. We also learn in this chapter, because at the end of the Chamber of Secrets, he had given Hermione and Ron the home number to the Dursleys, and Ron had called. Remember, Ron doesn't know Muggle things, so he's calling. He called the first week, and he's yelling over the phone, and it's like, oh my god. Anyway, as it turns out, Ron doesn't call back. Hermione doesn't call. She's traveling. They're both traveling. Hermione's in France. Ron ends up going to Egypt with his family. His dad had won this big surprise, this big, money grab, whatever, from the Daily Prophet. And they end up going to Egypt to visit Bill, one of the older Weasley kids, right? It's Bill and Charlie are the two oldest that we don't really get to meet till later. We get a glimpse of Bill in this one, and then we get a glimpse of Charlie in book 4. They do mention them, but anyway. So, both Hermione and Ron are talking about like ancient Egypt and the curses and all this. And I want to say like, I don't remember it really coming into play or too much into play, I should say, into the books. I actually think it would have been fascinating if She really delved into other cultures other than UK. Um, that actually would have been really cool. Yes, we get the Durhams and we get the floor, you know, flora, whatever, fleur de lis. What? It's not fleur de lis. The school where Fleur is from, right in the fourth book, in the Goblet of Fire. So we do see that there are other schools. There are other wizarding schools. There's an all boys school. There's an all girls school. Who knows if there's other schools? Like, I think if she really wanted to show some sort of inclusivity in a good way, she could have really dived into more of this, right? Learning about different cultures, learning about yes, mythical creatures, yes, potions, where these things are from. Like, we really could have gone deep into it. Yes, we kind of get it a little bit into the Fantastic Beasts, but not too much. But like, that would have been so cool. And I'm not saying Harry had to travel. Let me say that. But like, just we could have had more influences from different cultures, right? Instead, we get characters like Cho Chang, right? Our Asian, our one Asian character, right? We get Shacklebolt, right? For one of our only black characters, one of the few only black characters, right? So we have to think about that she specifically chose these horrific names for her diverse characters, okay? Let's just remember that. Now, that being said, we also see that, and again, I'm going to say that she did a pretty good job on this, okay? Giving her credit where credit's due when it comes to Harry as an actual character, especially in a kinship situation that really reflects a lot of kinship placements where you don't really know the truth about your family, you're segregated from your family, you know, you're treated as less than, you don't really get to explore your identity. She did a good job, right? Yes. If you are in the adoptee sphere, if you follow me for that content, at least on TikTok, I don't really talk a lot about adoption when it comes to this channel here on YouTube. But adoption does show up a lot in media, in books and movies and comics. It's all over the news. So frankly, there are a lot of kinship placements that are very similar to being a private infant adoptee, right? Even though according to the Declaration of the United Nations, there are 3 better options, which are kinship, fictive kin, which would be a friend of the family or someone within the same culture, and then lastly would be a guardianship. That needs a lot of reform, and that is what we do talk about. There's always going to be a need for safe external care. In my story, which I am writing my memoir on it, in my story, if my birth mom really couldn't get the help that she needed, safe external care would have been best for many reasons besides her health, but there was other things going on. Best to get me away from my bio father. And while private infant adoption really shouldn't have been a thing, it happened. It was the 90s. I love my adoptive parents. They are my parents. Love them, okay? I got extremely lucky with my adoptive parents, and they are the exact opposite of the Dursleys, okay? My parents have been open about me exploring things ever since I was little. They always told me the truth as far as what they knew. They never hid anything. They kept everything. Like, I have the pile of paperwork, folders, and stuff. So you think the Dursleys are like evil? Yes. In terms of when it comes to Harry, my parents, not like that. In fact, I would say my bio father is way worse than the Dursleys, okay? Like, the Dursleys are saints compared to what my bio father is. Let's put it that way. And that's scary, which is why part of why I was placed for adoption. I know I wasn't fostered to adopt. They both agreed. Anyway, we're not going to go through that. We're not going to go through that. If you've watched my TikToks, you'll know already, but yeah. So anyway, in that manner, I think that J.K. Rowling did a fantastic job in really showing that there are times where Harry struggles with his identity, where he's learning more things, where he's confused, where, you know, he questions things, but he knows that he can't fight things, right? We see the Dursley, and also the way that she wrote the Dursleys and how they really stomped down his identity. Like, oh, you're, you know, he says like, you're kind, right? That's bigotry, even though we're talking about Wizarding World. But the same way that we talked about in our last video when it comes to Lucius Malfoy and Tom Riddle being similar to Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, we have a lot of familiarities, right? Where there's a lot of classism, you know, there's a lot of, I'm trying to put it in a way that's not wizarding, just different forms of bigotry, right? You're kind, like, oh my God, like, God forbid you're different from me. And so it's important to remember. Also, I want to make note that in this chapter, Harry is reading about medieval history and how Muggles were afraid of power. That is very true. A lot of what we hear about is very much, you know, or at least shows, like if you've ever watched Merlin, love that show. Wish it didn't go off the air. And a lot of premise to a lot of these like fantasy books, right, are afraid of that power. You know, Game of Thrones, even, they were afraid of Daenerys and her family because they could, you know, have dragons. They're powerful, right? They would kill people that, or they would unalive people that had power. They were afraid of the unknown. And I feel like that premise still exists today, not just in book and media world, but it's also a reflection of what's going on off the screen, right? Off the paper. What's happening in our real world, right? With wars and what's happening on our streets and what's happening within our laws, like what we're fighting. We have to remember that a lot of the times as authors, we get inspiration from history or from what's happening. It's not all like, oh my God, you know, like I'm currently writing a few books, but in terms of one of the books that I'm currently working on, although it's at least fantasy. I don't know if it's going to be romantasy yet, but it's definitely in the fantasy realm. A lot of what I'm taking are inspirations from what's happening, from other cultures, from being afraid, from being, you know, different powerful stories, right? You know, we watch movies like, I was listening to I'll Make a Man Out of You the other day. Love that song. Love Mulan. But she was a real person, right? Same thing with Pocahontas. I know some people really love the movie, and let me say, like, it's very, they romanticize a teenager falling in love with a very grown man. Don't like that, Disney, okay? We'll say there's some really powerful lines as well as music in it, so give them props where it's due, okay? They did call out white people. This was back in, what, 1995, something like that, 1996. For that reason, I like the movie. But Pocahontas, again, was a real person, right? Her real name was Matoaka, right? Sacagawea was a real person, right? There are plenty of people that are real people that books are written about, right? That movies are inspired, to film. So you can't just think like, oh, grab any book and there's nothing that's um real in this, right? It could be romance, it could be romantasy, it could be whatever, but you're taking inspiration from the world around you. Marvel, Star Wars, Disney, we just saw Hoppers about a month ago, um, a little over a month ago at this point from when this goes out. And it really does talk about the environment and how humans are ruining our environment and how we're going to get it back and all these things, right? So we have to remember that there's going to be lessons in everything. You may not see it. And yes, even in romance books like Hunting Adeline, I know a lot of people hate on dark romance, but there are real world experiences. Even in books like Lights On and Caught Up, right, by Nevessa Allen. There are real things that happen. I've heard Italian book girls or Italian book talkers, right, talk about how they tend to shy away from the mob romance because those are very real to them, right? They deal with that there. Whereas in this time and this day and age, right, in America, we don't get that nearly as much. You talk about 40 years ago, sure, right? There were plenty of people. In fact, long story short, my dad was once married to the mob, his ex-wife. But that's another story. That is a whole other story. My dad has some interesting things. But like you have real world things that authors are inspired by, right? And they're doing research. And yes, back when JK was writing this, computers were still I shouldn't say computers were relatively new, but the internet was still relatively new. So I'm sure she was going to bookstores and to the library to do some research. Now, we pull up our phone or we pull up our tablet or we get on our computer and we can research. Makes it a lot easier. I like to have, a physical thesaurus with me sometimes or pull it up on the computer and like have it right there as I'm writing. Just so that I know that I can change up words, like what fits better, what flows better. People travel, right? They get inspired by their travels. There's some books that I would love to write in the future and I'm just kind of holding out because I'm like, in order for me to kind of like get into that mindset of this location, besides like physically looking at things like pictures, I want to be there. I want to experience it. I want to really be able to like sit there and like feel it in person, right? So some things, you got to hold off. Some things, everyone's different, right? Supposedly, J.K. Rowling wrote the first Harry Potter on a train on a napkin. So, I don't know. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. But anyway, that was the premise of chapter 1. In chapter 2, we learn about Marge. So stay tuned for that next week, next Sunday, and I'll see you then for our annotation. Bye.